I've lost countless nights of sleep since discovering who my daughter-in-law really is. Even now, I can hardly believe the nightmare that unfolded until I forced myself to sit down, calm my heart, and tell you everything. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from, because I promise you won't be disappointed by today's family drama. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. The milk was still warm when it hit my chest, splattering across my sweater and running down my arms. The kitchen smelled of sour dairy, and something far worse, the bitterness of hatred I never imagined could come from someone married to my son. Camille's voice tore through the air sharp and shrill as broken glass. She shouted that I had tried to poison my own grandson, her words echoing off the tiled walls. Peter burst into tears, his small hands reaching toward me, but she yanked him back so violently that the chair toppled over. Gavin froze by the doorway, his face pale, torn between his mother and his wife. I waited for him to speak, to tell her to stop, to defend me, but he just stood there silent as a shadow. Neighbors gathered outside after hearing the commotion. I saw Mrs. Cooper's worried face through the window. She mouthed something like, "Are you all right?" but I couldn't answer. My hands were trembling too hard. The milk had turned cold on my skin, sticky and humiliating. Camille kept ranting that I was jealous, that I wanted to control the family, that I was too old to know what was best for a child. Every word cut deeper than the last. Peter's cries filled the room until Camille's voice drowned them out completely. She clutched him to her chest, whispering nonsense about keeping him safe. I felt my heart twist when the boy cried out Nana again, but she slapped his hand away. I stepped back, afraid that one wrong move would make her even angrier. Gavin finally muttered that everyone should calm down, but the damage was done. The trust, the respect, the quiet peace of this house all shattered in a single afternoon. When the neighbors left and the house fell silent again, I went to my room. I sat there under the dim lamp, staring at the stains on my sweater. The smell of milk lingered like a ghost. My fingers traced the damp fabric as if it could still speak of the love I once gave freely. I realized then that kindness without boundaries is an invitation for cruelty. The clock struck 10, and somewhere in the house, Camille's laughter drifted faintly. I whispered into the darkness, my voice calm but certain. Enough. It's time to act. I have lived in this brick house for more than 40 years. Every corner carries the scent of my husband's laughter, the echo of our Sunday mornings, the hum of the radio that used to play while I cooked breakfast. Now it's only me and the ticking of the old clock above the mantel. My husband passed away nearly a decade ago, leaving behind not just memories, but a lifetime of security, a savings account, a pension fund, and this 2-story home in the quiet suburbs of Toledo, Ohio. Everything was put neatly into a notarized will, legally certified with my name as the sole beneficiary. People often said I was lucky, but luck has a way of turning into loneliness when you have no one to share it with. I've always been a woman of the old generation. I believed in patience, in sacrifice, in keeping the family together no matter what. I never sued anyone, never raised my voice in public, never asked for more than what I was given. I thought goodness would protect me. But the older I grew, the more I realized that goodness without boundaries becomes weakness. Sometimes I can hear my late husband's voice reminding me to stay cautious, yet my heart keeps wanting to believe the best in people. When Gavin, my only son, got married, I welcomed Camille into our family with open arms. She was lively, beautiful, and confident, the kind of woman who made an entrance in every room. I told myself that maybe she would bring warmth back into this old house. At first, she did. She called me, Mom brought flowers, helped decorate the living room, but little by little, her visits became requests, and her kindness started to sound rehearsed. Still, I gave. I gave because that's what mothers do. I bought things for Peter when he was born, covered some of Gavin's debts when his job went south. I told myself it was love, not charity. Yet every time the phone rang, a quiet fear stirred in my chest. Do they miss me? Or do they need something again? At night, I often sit by the window staring at the streetlights outside, wondering if my husband would be proud or disappointed to see how I let others take advantage of my softness. The walls around me are filled with pictures of family dinners, birthdays, holidays, smiling faces. But behind each frame, there's a growing silence that no photo can hide. Gavin has always been the quiet one, the kind of man who apologizes even when it's not his fault. At 40, he works as a stock clerk and part-time line cook at the Fast Bite Diner, a small chain scattered across Ohio. His paycheck covers the bills and little else, but he never complains. Every morning he leaves the house before dawn, the faint smell of coffee lingering in the kitchen, and every evening he comes home with tired eyes and a smile that tries too hard. The neighbors call him a good boy, the kind who shovels snow for the elderly and helps fix a leaky faucet without asking for a dime. But when I look at him, I see the boy who never learned to fight back. After his father's passing, something in him closed off. He stopped playing guitar, stopped going out with friends, stopped dreaming. It was as if grief built a wall inside him that no one could climb. I tried to reach him to remind him that life doesn't end just because someone's gone, but he would only nod and say he was fine. He wasn't. He spent most of his time in the garage tinkering with old radios or watching reruns of cooking shows. That was his world, small, safe, and painfully quiet. I used to tell him he should build a life of his own. I'd say, Gavin, you're a good man. You deserve to have someone to come home to. He'd smile shyly and change the subject. Deep down, I knew he was afraid of disappointment, afraid of not being enough. And in that fear, he became the kind of man who attracts the wrong kind of love, the kind that takes without giving. When Camille entered his life, I saw how his shoulders straightened, how his eyes lit up again. For a moment, I thought maybe she was the answer to all my prayers. But soon I realized that Gavin's kindness was a currency she spent freely. She decided what he ate, where they went, even how he spoke to me. He mistook control for care, and I watched my son fade into a quieter version of himself. Sometimes late at night I hear him pacing outside my room, whispering apologies to no one. I know that guilt keeps him awake, the guilt of being caught between two women who both love him, one by blood and one by choice. But what he doesn't see is that love without courage turns into a leash. When Gavin first brought Camille home, she looked like the answer to every mother's prayer. She was soft-spoken, polite, and always eager to help. Her dark hair was neatly tied back. Her eyes lowered when she spoke. Her smile gentle, yet practiced. She worked part-time at the same diner as Gavin, where they met during her rough patch with immigration papers. Gavin had helped her with rides to appointments and small loans, the kind gestures that come naturally to him. Before long, she began spending evenings with us cooking dinner and cleaning dishes, while insisting she didn't want to be a burden. I remember thinking at last, my son has found someone kind. She had a way of making people listen. Over tea, she would share stories of her childhood in a dusty town in northern Mexico. How her father fell ill. How she crossed the border with nothing but faith and a dream. Her voice would tremble at just the right moments, and Gavin's eyes always softened. Even I felt my heart ache when she said, sometimes in tears, that she had no family left in this world. I told her she could consider this house her home. Looking back now, that might have been my first mistake. Camille always knew how to charm. She remembered birthdays brought small gifts and complimented neighbors with just enough warmth to seem genuine. She learned to cook the dishes I liked, asking for my recipes, calling me Mom, in a tone that almost felt sincere. But now that I think of it, Her gestures were always in public, never in private. When the door closed and it was just the two of us, her smiles would fade. She'd stare at her phone fingers, tapping quickly, whispering in Spanish words I couldn't catch. There were things she never talked about. Whenever someone asked about her family, her face would stiffen, and she'd say it was too painful to remember. When Gavin once suggested visiting her hometown, she quickly changed the subject. I brushed it off, then thinking trauma runs deep and wounds take time. But a small voice inside me, one I ignored, kept whispering that something didn't fit. Now, in hindsight, I can see that every story she told had the same purpose: to make us pity her, to make us open our hearts and wallets without question. She wasn't just sweet, she was strategic. It started with little things, the kind of details you almost laugh off at first. A carton of milk gone faster than usual, the sugar jar half empty, the leftover stew missing from the fridge. I told myself it was nothing, that maybe I forgot, or Gavin had eaten more than I thought. But then, the electric bill doubled, the water meter spun faster than ever, and my silver earrings, the ones my husband gave me on our 10th anniversary, vanished from the drawer in my bedside table. I remember sitting there for a long moment, staring at the empty space where they had always been, trying to convince myself I had simply misplaced them. Age does that, doesn't it? Makes you doubt your own memory. For weeks, I blamed myself. I made lists, checked the pantry, even rearranged drawers, thinking maybe I had become forgetful. But then one afternoon, Mrs. Cooper from next door came for tea, and when she left, she couldn't find her wallet. We searched everywhere, the sofa, the porch, the kitchen counter, but it was gone. The realization settled heavy in my chest like a cold stone. That night, I took out a small notebook and started writing things down. Dates, times what disappeared, who had been in the house. It felt strange, almost paranoid, but something deep inside me whispered that this wasn't coincidence. Camille always had explanations. She said she'd had friends visiting, that maybe someone took things by accident. But no one in the neighborhood had ever seen her visitors. Sometimes around midnight, I'd hear a car door close and see headlights flashing briefly at the end of the street. I'd look out through the curtains, holding my breath. But by the time I stepped closer, the car would be gone. When I asked her about it, she smiled softly and said I was just giving a friend a ride. Her voice was smooth, practiced, the kind that makes you feel foolish for asking. The house used to feel safe. Every creak in the floor once reminded me of my husband's footsteps. Every shadow a memory of laughter. But lately, it feels different. The silence has weight. The air holds secrets. I find myself locking the bedroom door at night, double-checking the windows, hiding my purse under the bed. I never thought I'd feel unsafe in my own home. Yet here I am, counting the spoons, watching the lights flicker, waiting for the next thing to disappear. It began with a simple suggestion, one I thought any reasonable family would understand. I told Gavin that maybe we should start keeping better track of household expenses, that it might help us all feel more balanced. Before I could even finish, his expression tightened. He said Camille was already doing her best to save money, that I shouldn't worry so much. His voice was gentle, but the message was clear. I had crossed a line. Camille sat beside him, hands folded on the table, eyes glistening like a child wrongly accused. She whispered that she only wanted to help, that she knew she wasn't from here, that maybe she would never be good enough for me. Her voice trembled just enough to sound sincere. Gavin reached for her hand, and in that small gesture, I saw how easily she controlled him. I tried to explain. I said it wasn't about blame, that I simply wanted clarity, shared responsibility. But the more I spoke, the more uncomfortable Gavin became. He muttered that I was overreacting, that money wasn't everything. Camille sniffled softly, saying she felt like an outsider in her own home. I sat there speechless, realizing how neatly she had turned the situation. In a few sentences, I had become the cold, judgmental mother, and she the wounded daughter-in-law longing for approval. After they left the kitchen, I remained seated, staring at the two empty cups of tea. The spoon in mine had gone still, the tea long since cooled. I could still hear their muffled voices upstairs, hers soft and tearful, his low and apologetic. He was comforting her. He was protecting her. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if he would ever protect me again. Later that evening, I opened my notebook on the kitchen table. The pages had become crowded with numbers, notes, dates, small observations that once felt paranoid, but now looked like proof. My hands shook as I wrote another line, trying to make sense of everything. The yellow light from the ceiling flickered, casting my shadow across the page. The words came out crooked, trembling, almost as if they belonged to someone else. If this is love, why does it feel so cold? Pregnancy changed everything. Or maybe it just revealed what had been there all along. From the moment Camille announced she was expecting, she turned the house into her kingdom, and me into her servant. She began each morning with new demands, her voice sweet but sharp underneath. She wanted only traditional Mexican dishes. Specific ones she said were good for the baby. Caldo de camarón, chiles, rellenos, mole poblano dishes that took hours and ingredients I could barely pronounce. She would hand me long grocery lists filled with imported spices and expensive produce, and I would drive across town to find them. Gavin said it was important that pregnant women had cravings that I should understand. I nodded, though something inside me quietly broke each time I wiped the counter alone while hearing them laugh upstairs. She stopped eating with us altogether, said the smell of the kitchen made her nauseous. So she took her meals to their room, leaving plates and half-eaten food scattered on trays. I would collect them later, one by one, rinsing the dishes under cold water, while wondering when my home had stopped feeling like mine. Even the air felt different, heavier, quieter, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Gavin's devotion grew with every passing week. He hovered over her, carried her bag, fetched her water, bought anything she mentioned in passing. If I ever hesitated, he would glance at me with quiet disapproval, the kind that hurts more than shouting. "She's carrying our child, Mom," he'd say softly, as though explaining something to someone who didn't understand love. What he didn't see was how easily love can be twisted into obedience. I tried to stay patient. I told myself it was just hormones, just temporary. But patience, I've learned, can be mistaken for weakness. Camille began snapping her fingers when she needed something, leaving her laundry for me to fold, calling down from the stairs when the soup wasn't hot enough. She even changed the furniture arrangement without asking, saying it made the house feel brighter. It didn't. It felt like I was disappearing one small act at a time. At night, when the lights went out and their laughter faded, I would sit in the dark kitchen, the smell of cumin and soap lingering in the air. My hands smelled of garlic and fatigue. I'd look at the empty dining table, once the center of every holiday, every memory, and realize I was now cooking for people who no longer saw me. The first time I heard it, I thought it was a dream. A soft voice hushed and trembling somewhere beyond the thin walls of my bedroom. I sat up, heart beating fast, and realized it was coming from the kitchen. Camille was on the phone again. Her words came in waves of Spanish, low and quick, filled with something I couldn't quite name, fear maybe, or excitement. Then came the laughter, quiet but sharp, followed by a choked sob. It was the kind of sound that didn't belong to an innocent conversation. I lay there for a moment, listening to the rhythm of her voice, the occasional clink of a glass, the soft creak of the refrigerator door. Curiosity overpowered hesitation. I slipped on my robe and stepped into the hallway. The clock on the wall glowed 2:47 a.m. A narrow stream of light leaked from under the kitchen door. When I peeked inside, I saw her standing by the counter, one hand holding the phone, the other clutching a thick envelope. Money, it looked like. Her face was tense, her lips moving fast, repeating something I only half understood, el paquete. When she noticed my reflection in the window glass, she spun around, startled. The phone clicked off instantly. Her eyes widened, then softened into that same fragile innocence she used whenever Gavin was near. She mumbled something about checking the baby's cravings, then hurried past me with the envelope pressed against her chest. The faint scent of expensive perfume lingered long after she was gone. The next morning over breakfast, I brought it up gently. She smiled and said she had been talking to her sick mother in Mexico, that the poor woman needed money for treatment. Her voice shook just enough to sound sincere, but I noticed the phone screen earlier that night. The number wasn't from Mexico. It was from California. I didn't confront her then. Instead, I took out my notebook, the same one where I'd been recording missing items and strange bills, and added a new page. I started logging her calls, time duration, and notes of the phrases she repeated. El paquete. Always that word. Each night it came again around the same hour, her voice slicing through the silence like a secret no one else was supposed to hear. That's when the fear turned into something else, resolve. I wasn't losing my memory. I wasn't imagining things. Something was happening under my own roof, and this time I would not look away. It began with small things. Coins missing from the jar by the window, a few bills gone from my purse, earrings that used to sit neatly in the jewelry box, now nowhere to be found. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I misplaced them. Maybe Gavin took a few dollars for gas. But deep down, something didn't feel right. So one afternoon, I marked the serial numbers on 3 $100 bills with a tiny red dot hidden in the corner of each note. I tucked them in the envelope inside my dresser, the same place I'd kept them for years. Days later, the envelope was lighter. 2 bills were gone. I said nothing. Instead, I waited, watching. Camille moved around the house as if nothing had changed, humming while folding laundry, scrolling through her phone, flashing smiles that didn't reach her eyes. Then one morning, while browsing Facebook, a listing caught my attention. It was for a silver chain, men's style, slightly tarnished, being sold on Marketplace by a seller located just a few blocks away. My heart pounded as I zoomed in on the picture. The small engraving on the clasp was unmistakable. It was my husband's necklace, the one he wore every Sunday until the day he died. I printed the listing, walked straight to Gavin, and placed the paper on the table. My hands trembled, but my voice stayed steady. I told him what I'd found, how the money was missing, how I suspected something was wrong. He barely glanced at the photo before pushing it back toward me. "Mom," he said, sighing, "you're imagining things. Camille would never steal from you. You need to stop accusing her." His tone was sharp, colder than I'd ever heard. I tried to explain, to show him the serial numbers, the evidence, but he stood up, his jaw tight. "You're just being paranoid. You're making this house toxic." The words stung worse than any slap. I watched him leave the room, the printed page still on the table, curling at the edges under the kitchen light. Upstairs, I heard Camille's laugh, soft, triumphant, almost musical. I sat there for a long time, staring at the picture of the necklace. The proof was right there, and still no one believed me. In that silence, I understood what true loneliness feels like. It isn't about being alone in a room. It's about being surrounded by people who refuse to see the truth when it's right in front of them. I drove to Lucas's house one chilly afternoon, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. My younger brother had retired from the Toledo Police Department 5 years ago, but in my heart, he'd never stopped being the kind of man who could see through a lie from a mile away. When he opened the door, I didn't even try to smile. He studied my face for a second, then said quietly, "Something's wrong, isn't it?" Over a pot of black coffee, I told him everything. The missing money, the necklace on Facebook, the late-night calls, the lies that wrapped themselves around our home like a fog. Lucas listened without interrupting, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "A woman hiding her background, moving money, making secret calls in another language," he said slowly. "That's not just suspicious, Jordan. That's a pattern, and it's worth looking into." I hesitated. "I don't want trouble for Gavin. He still believes every word she says." Lucas nodded. "I know. That's why we'll do this quietly. No one needs to know yet." His voice took on that calm, professional tone I remembered from his years on the force. He promised to start by running Camille's name through temporary residency databases, cross-checking her social security number, and pulling public IRS tax records. "All legal," he said, raising a brow. "Just not something she'd want us to see." He opened his laptop and logged into an encrypted network used by retired officers, a digital back channel that still gave him access to certain systems. The glow from the screen lit up the small kitchen, reflecting off his glasses. I watched as he typed carefully, his eyes scanning lines of data. "If she's who she says she is," he murmured, "it'll show up. If not, we'll find out soon enough." I felt both comforted and afraid. Comforted because someone finally believed me, afraid because deep down, I already knew what we would find. Lucas printed out a blank file folder, labeling it Case 47 Private. He slid it across the table toward me. "This stays between us," he said. "You've been living with a stranger, Jordan. It's time we find out who she really is." That night, as I drove home under the gray Toledo sky, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time in months, the fear that had paralyzed me began to turn into focus. What began as quiet suspicion had now become a mission, one that would stretch across nearly 2 years, testing every bond of family and truth I had left. I started writing everything down. At first, it was just a few notes: the time Camille left the house, the number of minutes she spent on her late-night calls, the days when money or jewelry went missing. But soon, it became a daily ritual, something precise and methodical. Each morning, I opened a new page in a digital journal on my laptop and typed with steady hands. I logged every detail: the smell of her perfume lingering near my dresser, the sound of the front door closing at odd hours, even the names flashing on her phone screen when she thought I wasn't looking. Whenever a strange charge appeared on the bank statement, I took a picture. When a receipt didn't match the groceries in the fridge, I photographed that too. I created a folder on my computer, password protected, labeled simply Household Records. Inside it were hundreds of notes, screenshots, and photos, all arranged by date. And because I had learned the hard way that technology can fail, I saved a copy on an external hard drive locked safely in the basement cabinet. I told myself it wasn't paranoia, it was self-defense. Lucas checked in regularly. I began noting down the serial numbers of every large bill that disappeared and sent them to him. He compared them with suspicious bank deposits reported in nearby branches, cash transactions made under different names, but matching the same sequence of numbers. His voice over the phone was calm but serious. "You're doing the right thing, Jordan. Keep recording everything. The pattern will expose itself." For the first time in months, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet strength replacing the helplessness that had haunted me. I no longer cried when Camille slammed the door or called me useless behind Gavin's back. I just observed, documented, and stored the truth piece by piece. The power wasn't in confrontation anymore. It was in preparation. Each entry in that journal became more than a note. It was a shield. The timestamps, the photos, the details others overlooked. They were my proof, my voice when no one would listen. I wasn't just an aging widow living in fear. I was building a record that could stand on its own, something undeniable when the time came. I remember typing one final line before closing my laptop one night. The truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be written down. Lucas called me on a gray morning in early spring. His voice was calm, but carried that quiet tension I recognized from his days on the force. "Meet me at Hillcrest Cafe," he said. "Come alone." My heart raced the entire drive there. The place was nearly empty when I arrived, the kind of diner that still smelled of coffee grounds and rain-soaked coats. Lucas was waiting at a corner booth, a thick folder tied with a red string sitting on the table between us. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he slid the folder across the table, the paper inside, heavy with something more than just ink. "I think you should see this," he said quietly. I untied the string and opened it. The first page bore the emblem of the FBI and Interpol side by side. My breath caught as I began to read. Camille Torres, born 1990, Mexico City, wanted for cross-border fraud, identity theft, and large-scale property deception. The letters blurred for a moment. My mind went blank, then flooded all at once. Every lie, every missing dollar, every late-night call, every crocodile tear. Lucas continued, his voice steady. "She's been on the watch list for 3 years, moved across states under different names, used marriage as a tool, mostly middle-aged men with stable finances. She gains their trust, marries them, then drains everything before disappearing." I stared at the page, my hands trembling. "So it's real. She's not who she says she is." Lucas nodded grimly. "The fingerprint match came back 96%. That's as close to certain as it gets. The file was verified through an interagency link, Homeland Security, Interpol, the IRS. Everything lines up." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the coffee machine was the only sound between us. I thought about Gavin, his soft heart, his blind faith, and the child upstairs who carried both innocence and danger in equal measure. Lucas leaned closer, lowering his voice. "This isn't just theft, Jordan. It's a federal crime. And if she's tied to the ring we think she is, they'll come looking for her and maybe for anyone too close." I looked down at the red string lying on the table. My brother's hand reached over, firm and reassuring. "You've done the right thing by coming to me. Now we handle this carefully. No confrontation yet. Let me talk to my contacts." When I walked out of the cafe, the world felt heavier. The drizzle had turned into real rain, washing the dust off the parked cars. I clutched the folder under my coat, feeling the truth pressing against my ribs like a heartbeat. After nearly 2 years of doubt, I finally had proof, and it terrified me more than all the lies combined. Lucas called me a week after that meeting, his tone clipped and grave. "Jordan," he said, "I found something else. You need to see this in person." We met again at his house this time. Blinds drawn, laptop, open folders spread across the dining table like a crime scene. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. On the screen was a photograph of a young woman, her features slightly different but eerily familiar. Her name was Marina Lopez. Lucas said, his finger tapping the image. Died in El Paso 6 years ago, but her social security number was used in Dallas, Texas, for a cosmetic surgery about 5 years back, rhinoplasty and cheekbone reconstruction. Guess who signed in under that name? I froze. "Camille," I whispered. Lucas nodded. The clinic verified the appointment and payment record, all under Marina Lopez's ID. We ran both faces through our old morphology software facial structure analysis from the department. 98% match. It's the same woman, Jordan. She didn't just lie about her past. She rebuilt her face. He slid a set of printed images toward me, before and after photos. The first showed a softer face, rounder nose, gentler smile. The second, the Camille I knew, angular, poised, beautiful, in a way that drew attention and hid danger behind charm. My hand trembled as I turned each page. But what struck me most wasn't the nose or the jawline. It was the eyes, cold, calculating, the same piercing gaze that met mine every morning across the breakfast table. She used a dead woman's identity to start over. Lucas continued. It's a common tactic in fraud networks. When the heat gets close, they disappear and come back as someone else. New name, new face, clean slate. And from there, the cycle starts again. I sat back feeling my chest tighten. The air seemed to vanish from the room. I thought about every smile Camille had given Gavin every time she said she loved our family, every gentle pat on my grandson's head. It wasn't love. It was rehearsal, part of a performance she had perfected over years across borders. Lucas placed a hand on my shoulder. She's dangerous, Jordan. This isn't about jealousy or paranoia anymore. You're living with someone who's been reborn through deception. I looked at the photos again, the same eyes staring at me from two faces, one from the past, one from my present. A chill crawled down my spine. She hadn't just stolen money or trust. She had stolen a life, then worn it like a mask. It started as a memory small, almost meaningless, until everything else began to fall into place. I remembered how Camille never let me hold Peter even when he was a newborn. She always had an excuse ready. He might catch a cold, she'd say. Your perfume could irritate his skin, or the doctor said he shouldn't be around too many people. At first, I believed her. I thought she was just overprotective, like many new mothers. But now, with everything Lucas had uncovered, those words began to sound rehearsed. One evening, months earlier, I had walked into the living room unexpectedly and caught Camille crouched beside her purse. She quickly snapped it shut, but not before I caught a glimpse of a photograph. It showed a woman I didn't recognize holding a baby that wasn't Peter. Or maybe it was. The baby's hair was darker, the skin tone slightly different. Behind them, a sign written in Spanish read, Centro de Maternidad San Felipe. I had brushed it off at the time, assuming it was some relative of hers in Mexico. But now that image burned in my mind like a brand. I told Lucas about it. He listened, his brow furrowing deeper with every word. Jordan, he said carefully, if what you're describing is accurate, she might have used a falsified birth certificate. That child could be her way into residency and government aid. It's not uncommon for fraud networks to adopt or claim unrelated children under fake documents. If the paperwork checks out, it's almost impossible to disprove without DNA testing. My throat went dry. You mean Peter might not even be Gavin's son? Lucas didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the file open in front of him, filled with dates, stamps, and codes. There's a strong chance, he said finally. I'll verify it, but you need to prepare yourself. This isn't just financial deception anymore. It's identity fraud. Federal level. I sat there, my hands gripping the edge of the table, feeling the air leave the room. The pieces of the puzzle fit together now in the most horrifying way. Her control, her secrecy, the way she guarded that child like a fortress. It wasn't maternal instinct, it was fear of exposure. That night, I went through my old journals, reading every line, every date that mentioned Peter. The moments I thought were signs of new motherhood now felt like warnings I hadn't understood. And in the quiet of my room, I finally said it out loud to no one but myself. She didn't just steal our money. She stole our bloodline. Lucas waited until I was seated before sliding a single photograph across the table. You need to see this, he said quietly. The image was grainy, but clear enough. 4 women, all dressed elegantly, standing under the neon glow of a Miami bar sign. Their smiles were dazzling, their eyes confident, almost predatory. In the center was Camille, holding a champagne flute, her hand resting on the shoulder of another woman with dark curls. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. That photo, Lucas explained, tapping the corner where a date stamp read 2018, was taken during an Interpol surveillance operation in Miami. The group was known informally as the Widow Circle. He flipped to another page, a report stamped, Confidential. Interpol FBI Joint Task Force. They targeted widowers and single men over 40, most of them emotionally vulnerable and financially stable. Their method was simple romance marriage, then financial extraction. Once the bank accounts were empty, they disappeared, new names, new faces, new countries. I stared at Camille's smiling face, that perfect image of tenderness I once mistook for sincerity. "So she's done this before," I whispered. Lucas nodded grimly. At least 3 confirmed cases across Florida and Arizona. One of the victims reported her under the name Elena Rivera. But the investigation stalled after all 4 women underwent cosmetic changes and left the country. Without physical matches, the case went cold. He paused, his eyes hardening. Until now. He turned another page. The passport scans showed entries into the U.S. under different aliases. Marina Lopez, Sofia Alvarez, and finally Camille Torres. She probably re-entered with a falsified visa after the ring dispersed, Lucas said. Marrying Gavin gave her legal standing, a clean record, and access to financial legitimacy. She didn't just find a husband, Jordan. She found her cover. I felt the blood drain from my face. The thought of my son, gentle and trusting, being used as a shield made my stomach twist. So all of this, the pregnancy, the tears, the kindness, it's all a performance. Lucas looked at me with quiet sympathy. For her, it's a profession. Emotional fraud is her weapon. She builds lives, drains them, and walks away without a trace. The pattern fits perfectly. I looked down again at the photograph, 4 women frozen in time, glasses raised, their laughter captured forever. I wondered how many families they'd broken, how many hearts they'd emptied before moving on. The woman in the center, the one I had called my daughter-in-law, was not a victim of her past. She was its architect. And for the first time, I truly understood what it meant to be deceived by someone living under your roof. I sat there for what felt like hours, the folder open in front of me, pages spread like broken glass across the table. My hands trembled as I traced the lines of typed words, every sentence confirming the things I had feared, the truths I had tried so hard not to believe. 2 years of doubt, of sleepless nights, of telling myself I was paranoid, all of it was real. Every whisper, every missing bill, every lie she ever told had led here. Camille Torres. The name I had welcomed into my home, the woman I had cooked for, prayed for, defended to my son, was not my daughter-in-law. She was a wanted criminal. My eyes lingered on the seal of Interpol stamped across the final page, bold and undeniable. I remembered the nights she cried in the kitchen, the way she held her belly, and said she was scared of losing the baby. I had made her soup, rubbed her back, told her she was family. I had loved her like blood. And now I realized she had been using that love as her weapon all along. The anger came first, sharp, hot, and blinding. How dare she? How dare she use my son, my family, my kindness? But then came something heavier, quieter, pity. Gavin wasn't her partner. He was her shield. My poor boy had believed every tear, every touch. He thought he was saving her, when in truth, she was saving herself. I could see now how skillfully she had woven guilt into affection, turning his compassion into obedience. He wasn't weak. He was trapped in a web spun by someone who understood exactly how to manipulate a heart too gentle for deceit. I turned to the last page expecting nothing more could hurt me. But the words there sliced deeper than anything before Camille Torres is suspected to have used her child as proof of residency. I reread it twice, my breath catching each time. Used her child. Used Peter, the little boy whose laughter had filled the house, whose drawings I kept on the refrigerator door. My grandson, or maybe not my grandson at all. The tears came without sound, sliding down my face onto the pages below. The ink bled slightly where they fell. I whispered his name, Peter, as if saying it could make him real again, could make the last 2 years less of a lie. But the truth stood there in black and white. The child I had loved might have been nothing more than a document, a means to an end, another piece of the con. I closed the folder slowly, pressing my shaking hands against its cover. My heart felt heavier than it ever had yet. Somewhere beneath the grief, a cold clarity began to form. The deception was complete, but it wasn't over yet. The first step was to follow the money. That's what Lucas said as he set his laptop on my kitchen table one rainy afternoon. We brewed coffee strong enough to keep us awake for hours, then began combing through every transaction linked to Gavin's bank accounts. At first, the statements looked ordinary grocery stores, utility bills, small restaurant charges, but buried between the everyday purchases were expenses that made no sense. A $2 $300 charge from a luxury boutique in Miami, a $1 $200 payment to a watch retailer in New York. Airline tickets booked under Camille's name to destinations Gavin had never mentioned, Los Angeles, Dallas, and one to Cancun. Lucas's expression hardened as he scrolled further. "This isn't spending," he said. "It's laundering." He explained that financial abusers often mix personal and illegal transactions to mask the pattern. Then he leaned back and took out his phone. "I'm going to make a call." Within the hour, he had contacted an old colleague from the Ohio Financial Protection Bureau. Under the state's Elder Financial Abuse Statute, he could legally request limited data access for the purpose of senior protection consultation. It was a narrow but legitimate loophole, one that allowed us to trace activity that might otherwise stay hidden. A few days later, the data came in line after line of digital evidence. Among the routine bills and grocery payments, one detail stood out: a recurring wire transfer of $4,800 sent monthly to an account in Guadalajara, Mexico. The timing matched Camille's paydays almost exactly. "That's not coincidence," Lucas said, his tone clipped. "She's funneling money out of the country, probably to an accomplice or a holding account." I felt my stomach twist. Every month while I was clipping coupons and worrying about bills, she had been sending thousands of dollars across borders. I imagined her sitting at my dining table smiling sweetly while clicking through wire transfers using my son's name as her cover. The betrayal ran deeper than money. It was the erosion of trust, the quiet invasion of my family's safety. Lucas looked at me across the table. "We'll build this case right, Jordan. Slow, clean, and airtight. She's made too many moves to hide her trail completely." I nodded, though the room seemed to blur for a moment. Gavin still believed in her, still defended her at every turn. He would never accept this, not yet. That was the hardest part. To keep silent, to act normal, to smile at the woman who had gutted our lives from within. That night after Lucas left, I printed every statement, highlighted every transfer, and stored the files in a folder labeled Proof, Phase 1. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I looked around at the walls, the family photos, the space that had once felt warm, and I whispered to myself, "If justice means standing alone, then alone is what I'll be." I had always believed that truth would eventually reveal itself, but I never imagined it would come through a camera lens. After Lucas confirmed the financial evidence, he suggested we gather visual proof, something undeniable. So I bought 3 miniature cameras online, one disguised as a potted plant, another as a fake electrical outlet, and the last hidden inside a photo frame near Peter's crib. I waited until Camille went shopping, then installed them carefully, my heart pounding the entire time. Every move felt dangerous, but silence had become unbearable. For the first 2 days, nothing happened, just the usual tension of a household pretending to be normal. But on the third night, the screen came alive with the kind of cruelty that strips away all illusions. The footage from the kitchen showed Gavin standing by the sink speaking softly, holding his phone as if trying to explain something. Then Camille's voice rose sharp and venomous. She slapped him across the face so hard that the sound echoed through the microphone. His phone clattered to the floor. "You're just your mother's puppet," she screamed, her eyes burning with fury. Gavin didn't fight back. He just stood there, silent, broken. I couldn't look away. My hands shook as I clicked to the next recording, the one from Peter's room. The timestamp read 2:14 p.m. The baby was crying. His tiny fists clenched, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. The cries went on for nearly 20 minutes. Camille sat in a chair nearby, scrolling through her phone, laughing. Then she spoke in Spanish, her tone light, almost playful. "He still thinks I'm the perfect wife." The words twisted my stomach. I paused the video, pressed play again, hoping I had misheard. But the sentence was clear, the laughter genuine. I watched all 3 videos twice, maybe 3 times, unable to believe the woman I once defended was capable of such coldness. My son's face haunted me, the way he'd looked at her with devotion, the way he'd apologized on her behalf. He had no idea what was happening behind closed doors. That night, I transferred every file to an encrypted hard drive Lucas had given me. The blue progress bar crawled across the screen like a slow heartbeat. When it was done, I placed the drive into a small steel case, sealed it, and drove it to Lucas's house. He locked it inside his personal safe without a word. The weight of it, physical and emotional, felt enormous. As I left the sky above, Toledo was dark and quiet. For the first time, I wasn't just a victim or a witness. I was the keeper of proof that would soon end the lies, no matter how deep they ran. I decided that if Camille wanted to believe I was weak, I would let her. Sometimes the best way to fight a snake is to let it think you're dying before you strike. So I began my act, coughing in the mornings, moving slower than usual, wincing when I stood up. I told Gavin my blood pressure had been unstable again, and that my joints were too stiff to walk much. He worried, of course, but Camille's smile gave her away. There was a glint of satisfaction in her eyes, as if she were watching the last obstacle to her victory fade away. Within a week, she had taken over most of the household chores, not out of kindness, but control. She cooked what she wanted, moved my medicine cabinet, and kept whispering to Gavin that I needed rest. She thought she had finally silenced me. What she didn't know was that every cough, every sigh, was part of a plan. While pretending to nap, I would listen to her pacing outside my door, talking on the phone in Spanish. Her tone was sharper now, more confident. The predator felt safe again. When she left one afternoon for her doctor's appointment, I used the quiet hours to act. I locked my bedroom door, took out the spare keys I had hidden in a sewing box, and changed the lock on my study. Every document that mattered, bank books, property deeds, insurance forms, and the old version of my will, went into a locked drawer. I slipped the new key into the lining of my purse right under a patch of fabric. Then I wiped the doorknob clean and lay back down on my bed, letting the house fall silent again. Later that evening, Gavin came in with papers in his hand. His voice was hesitant. "Mom, Camille thought it might help if I took care of your finances, just in case you get worse." I glanced at the form and instantly recognized it a financial power of attorney. If he signed it, Camille would gain full access to his accounts and mine through marital linkage. My heart raced, but I stayed calm. "Let me think about it," I said softly. That night, I called my attorney, Mrs. Bailey, from the old landline. Camille never bothered to check. Within hours, she filed a temporary hold under Ohio's Elder Financial Protection Act, effectively freezing any transfer of financial authority due to suspected manipulation. The next morning, Camille's frustration was palpable. She slammed the kitchen drawers, muttering that lawyers always ruin everything. I kept my face pale, my voice weak, and whispered, "I'm sure it's just a mistake." But inside, I smiled. For once, I wasn't just surviving. I was winning not with force, but with foresight. Age had taken my strength, but not my sense. I met with attorney Marion Kessler on a gray Tuesday morning, the kind of morning when the sky looked like wet paper and the air smelled faintly of rain. Marion had handled our family's affairs for years. She'd known my late husband Harold and had drawn up our first will back when Gavin was still in high school. Her office hadn't changed much: stacks of legal books, a portrait of the Ohio Supreme Court on the wall, and a pot of tulips wilting by the window. She looked up as I entered and said gently, "Jordan, I was wondering when you'd come." I sat down, my hands trembling slightly around the folder I carried. "It's about Peter," I said quietly. "I need to make sure he's safe. Legally safe." Marion nodded, the look in her eyes turning sharp and focused. "Tell me everything." I explained the situation. Gavin's blindness, Camille's lies, the investigation with Lucas, and my growing fear that if anything happened to me, that woman would find a way to take everything. Marion listened without interrupting, then opened a fresh file and began writing. "There's a way," she said, "to lock everything beyond her reach. We'll establish a trust fund in Peter's name with you as the sole trustee and legal guardian. It'll hold your home, your savings accounts, and your life insurance. Once transferred, those assets won't legally belong to you anymore. They'll belong to the trust. Which means Camille can't touch a cent, no matter what she tries." The plan moved fast. Marion arranged for all the paperwork to be notarized through the Lucas County Probate Court. I spent nearly 2 hours signing forms, each page carefully reviewed. The language was airtight. If the child's parents are found guilty of fraud, negligence, or criminal conduct, guardianship and financial benefit shall remain under trustee authority until the minor reaches adulthood. When it was done, Marion slid the final document across the table. "Congratulations," she said softly. "You just made Peter the safest child in Ohio." I looked down at my trembling hands. "It's not about safety," I murmured. "It's about love, the kind that survives deceit." Then, lowering my voice, I added, "If anything happens to me, Marion, if I get sick or if she tries something, don't let that woman near my grandson." Marion met my eyes, her own expression firm. "You have my word, Jordan." As I left her office, the courthouse bells rang noon. I felt a strange calm settle over me, not peace exactly, but resolve. For months, I had felt powerless, but that morning, I had taken back control. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with the quiet armor of the law. By the time everything was in place, my nerves felt like piano wires pulled too tight. The files, the photos, the videos, all of it sat inside a brown envelope on Lucas's desk, thick enough to change the course of our lives. That morning, we drove together to the Toledo Police Department. Lucas handed the evidence to Detective Harlan, a man he'd worked with years ago. Harlan flipped through the reports, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of the Interpol seal and the ICE contact signatures. "You've built a solid case," he said, his tone shifting from polite curiosity to sharp focus. "This could go federal." Lucas nodded. "It already has. We just need the right moment, something undeniable." "She's smart, Harlan. Too smart. If we move too early, she'll vanish before sunrise." After leaving the station, we went straight to Lucas's house to prepare digital copies for the Department of Homeland Security and ICE. Every file was encrypted, every photograph labeled and timestamped. We sent the encrypted drives through official channels, then sat in silence, the hum of the printer, the only sound in the room. It felt surreal to have spent 2 years being gaslit, dismissed, and doubted, and now finally to hold the truth in our hands. But justice required patience. We needed her to slip just once with the cameras rolling and the evidence live. 2 nights later, the moment came. Around 2:00 a.m., the motion sensor pinged on Lucas's phone. The kitchen camera was active. He pulled up the feed, and there she was, Camille wearing a black hoodie, stuffing clothes into a large duffel bag. In her hand, she carried a small metal box, the same one I'd seen hidden in her closet. She moved quickly, glancing over her shoulder before heading toward the back door. My heart pounded so hard I could barely breathe. "She's running," I whispered. Lucas was already dialing. "Harlan, it's Fordham. She's on the move. We've got time-stamped footage. Possible evidence transport." His voice was all business now, calm but charged. He hung up after a short exchange, then turned to me. "They're mobilizing. We'll need a warrant within hours." By dawn, he received the call. The Toledo PD had secured an emergency search warrant backed by ICE coordination. "We're ready," Harlan said over the speakerphone. "But Jordan, you must stay silent for 48 hours. No hint, no confrontation, no reaction. Let her believe she's free. We'll take her ourselves." I stared at the phone, my hands cold, despite the warm morning light filtering through Lucas's window. 48 hours. After everything, the finish line was so close, I could taste it. And yet I had to stay still, pretend nothing was coming. When I stepped outside, the wind carried the faint scent of rain, the same as the day it all began. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, "Hold on just a little longer." The morning began with the sound of rain tapping against the kitchen window, a soft, steady rhythm that carried a strange weight. Toledo skies were gray, swollen with storm clouds, and the air felt thick enough to choke on. I was in the kitchen, warming Peter's milk, humming softly, the way I always did to calm him. The smell of formula mixed with rain, something tender and fragile in that small domestic moment. Then the sound of footsteps broke it. Camille stood at the doorway. Her hair was damp, her face expressionless, but her eyes, those cold, contemptuous eyes, were alive with something cruel. Without a word, she strode across the room, grabbed the bottle from my hand, and hurled it to the floor. The glass shattered, milk splattering across my slippers and the tiles. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then she screamed, her voice cutting through the room like thunder. "You're nothing but a useless old woman. I don't need anyone telling me how to raise my child." Her words sliced through me, but I didn't flinch. I'd been preparing for this moment. Still hearing it aloud, that venom, that hatred, it felt like every sacrifice I'd made, every meal cooked and tear swallowed, had been for nothing. Gavin rushed in from the hallway, his face pale. "Camille, stop," he whispered, but his voice trembled. He looked at me, then at her, frozen between the two halves of his life. His lips parted as if to defend me, but the words never came. He stood there motionless while the storm built around us. Peter's cry pierced the chaos. He was in his playpen, his little hands reaching out, his eyes wide with fear. "Nana." He sobbed, that small, broken word splitting something inside me. I took a step forward, but Camille blocked me. Her arms stretched out like a wall. "Don't you dare touch him," she hissed. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink, just rain, broken glass, and that child's cry. Gavin covered his face, shoulders shaking. "Please, both of you," he said weakly. "Please." But Camille was past reason. She turned on him now, voice rising. "She's poisoned you against me from the start. You're her puppet, Gavin. You always were." I watched my son crumble, the tears spilling from his eyes, the conflict tearing him apart. And yet, Despite the ache in my chest, there was clarity. The woman in front of me, the one screaming in my kitchen, was no longer pretending. The mask had finally cracked. Outside, thunder rolled over the city. Inside, my hands shook, but not from fear anymore. Because for the first time, I knew this was the storm before justice. The pounding at the door came like thunder, 3 sharp knocks that cut through the shouting and Peter's cries. For a moment, the whole house froze. Camille turned toward the sound, her face twisted with irritation. But before she could move, the door swung open. Lucas stepped inside, his expression cold and focused, followed by 2 uniformed police officers and 2 ICE agents in dark jackets, the words Homeland Security Investigations printed in bold white across their backs. One of them held a document, a warrant sealed and stamped by the federal court. The air in the kitchen shifted instantly, thick with disbelief. Camille blinked, her mouth half open, the color draining from her face. What is this?" she stammered, her voice cracking. Officer Daniels stepped forward, voice steady and formal. "Camille Torres, alias Camille Norris, you are under arrest for identity fraud, grand theft, and interstate deception." The words hit the room like a gavel. For a split second, no one moved. Then Camille's legs gave out slightly, and she stumbled backward, clutching the edge of the counter. "No! This is a mistake! I'm a mother!" She shouted the words, desperate, frantic. Lucas's voice cut through hers, calm and low. "A mother doesn't steal lives, Camille." The ICE agents approached one, reciting her Miranda rights, while the other took her wrists and clasped the metal cuffs around them. The sound of steel locking into place echoed louder than the rain outside. Gavin stood motionless, his eyes wide, his lips trembling. "Camille," he whispered, but his voice was hollow, the sound of a man realizing too late that everything he loved was built on lies. Peter cried again, louder this time, reaching toward the commotion from his crib. I couldn't move at first. My whole body felt suspended between shock and relief. My hands trembled as I looked at the scene before me, my son broken. The woman who destroyed our family now shackled, and Lucas standing tall, the silent guardian of truth. Camille tried to pull free, her hair falling across her face. "You don't understand," she screamed. "He made me do it." It wasn't my fault, but no one answered. The officers guided her toward the door, their steps firm and professional. As they passed me, her eyes met mine for a final time, full of hatred, fear, and something almost like regret. I said nothing. The law was speaking now, and for once it didn't tremble. When the door shut behind them, silence filled the house. Not the silence of tension, but the deep, heavy quiet of justice finally taking its breath. I felt my knees weaken, my heart pounding, and I whispered to myself, "It's over." Camille's screams filled the room as the officers tightened the cuffs around her wrists. "I'm being framed," she shouted, her voice cracking between sobs and fury. "They're lying. This is all a setup. You don't understand. I'm the victim here," she thrashed, trying to pull away. Tears streaking her mascara, but no one moved to comfort her. The illusion she'd built for years, the perfect wife, the devoted mother, was collapsing right there on my kitchen floor. Lucas stayed calm, almost unnervingly so. "A setup, huh?" he said, pulling his laptop from his bag. "Then maybe you'd like to explain this." He placed it on the counter, flipped the screen toward her, and pressed play. The hidden camera footage lit up the room. There she was on the screen, striking Gavin across the face, calling him names, shoving him into the wall. The next clip showed Peter crying in his crib for nearly 20 minutes, while Camille scrolled through her phone, laughing and speaking in Spanish. Camille froze her mouth open, but no words came out. The color drained from her face as the officers exchanged glances. "Stop. That's not me. That's fake," she shouted, but her voice cracked under the weight of the evidence. Lucas didn't even look up. "You can keep denying it," he said quietly, "but science doesn't lie." He turned to the ICE agent who stepped forward and held out a folder. Inside was a printed report from the forensic lab. DNA comparison from hair samples found in your brush. The agent announced matches 99.98%, with the Interpol file for Camille Torres of Mexico City, wanted for cross-border fraud and identity theft. The silence that followed was deafening. Camille's body went limp, her defiance melting into despair. "No," she whispered, shaking her head slowly. "You don't know what they made me do." But her voice trailed off as the agents began to guide her toward the door. Outside, word had already spread. Neighbors gathered along the sidewalk and behind the fence, holding umbrellas under the gray drizzle. They whispered among themselves, faces pale with shock. Mrs. Keaton from across the street muttered, "All this time, and she fooled everyone." As Camille was let out, her cries turned to wails. "Please, someone believe me," she screamed, but no one answered. The cameras from police vests caught every frame, the wet pavement, the flashing lights, the woman who once pretended to be perfect, now exposed for what she truly was. I stood by the doorway, my heart pounding, watching karma unfold in real time. Justice hadn't come quietly. It had come loudly, publicly, exactly as it should. As the agents led Camille out into the rain, Gavin sank to his knees on the wet floor, the weight of it all finally crushing him. His hands clutched his head, fingers digging into his hair, eyes staring blankly at the puddle spreading from the shattered bottle of milk. "How could she?" He whispered the words broken, lost somewhere between disbelief and grief. His voice cracked again, quieter this time. "How could she do this?" Lucas stepped closer, his shoes leaving damp prints on the tile. He rested a steady hand on Gavin's shoulder, firm but not unkind. "You're not blind, Gavin," he said softly. "You just love the wrong person." The words landed heavy but true. Gavin's shoulders trembled. For the first time, he seemed smaller, not just a man, but a son who had finally seen the truth too late. Tears streamed down his face as he turned toward me. His eyes, red and swollen, searched mine like a child's. "Mom," he choked out, his voice breaking. "I made you suffer because of my blind faith. Because I couldn't see what she really was." I took a slow breath, the air thick with the smell of rain and dust. Part of me wanted to cry, but another part, the mother in me, understood that this was not the time for punishment. It was the time for grace. I reached out, brushing my fingers against his cheek, feeling the warmth of his tears. "Mistakes don't destroy us, son," I said quietly. "But holding on to them, defending them even when we know they're wrong, that's what takes everything away." He closed his eyes, sobbing harder now, the sound raw and human. Lucas stood silently beside us, giving space for what needed to happen. Outside, the agents' voices faded as the car door shut, and the storm began to ease, the rain falling softer against the windows. For a long moment, no one spoke. Gavin stayed on his knees, clutching my hand as if afraid I'd disappear too. I thought of the boy he used to be, gentle, kind, eager to please, and how love, when misplaced, had turned that tenderness into weakness. But now, as he wept, I saw something else return to him, the first spark of understanding. When he finally whispered, "I'm sorry," I smiled faintly. "Then learn from it," I said. "That's all a mother ever wants." Outside, thunder rolled one last time, distant now, as if the storm itself was letting go. The sound of the police car faded into the distance, its flashing lights reflecting faintly against the rain-soaked street. For a long moment, the house stood still, a fragile quiet after the storm. Gavin was still trembling, his face buried in his hands, when Peter began to whimper softly from the corner of the room. The sound broke me. I knelt down, arms open, and Gavin gently placed the child into my embrace. The moment Peter felt my touch, he clung to me, small hands gripping my sweater, face pressed into my chest, his cries muffled against my heartbeat. His little body shook with leftover fear, and I held him tighter, rocking him gently the way I used to when he was a baby. My hands trembled, my throat tight. "It's all right, sweetheart," I whispered through tears. "No one will ever hurt you again. Not while I'm here." The words came out soft, but full of promise, a vow born from both love and battle. I could feel his heartbeat against mine, the rhythm slowing as he calmed the way children instinctively trust safety when they finally find it. For the first time in months, I felt the walls of that house breathe again. The air that once smelled of fear now felt light, almost pure. Lucas stepped closer, his expression serious but kind. "Jordan," he said quietly, reaching into his coat pocket. He handed me a sealed envelope, the court's insignia stamped on the front. "This came through just now, emergency protective custody order from Lucas County Family Court. You are now the temporary legal guardian of Peter Walters." My breath caught. I looked up at him, hardly believing it. "Already?" He nodded. "We made sure the paperwork was ready before today. The judge signed it the moment ICE confirmed the arrest. He's officially under your protection." I pressed the envelope against my chest, right next to where Peter's head rested. Tears welled up again, not from pain this time, but from gratitude, the kind that only comes when you've fought too long for something right. I looked at Gavin, who sat silently nearby, eyes wet but relieved. He mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Outside, the rain began to ease. A faint beam of sunlight broke through the clouds, filtering through the kitchen window and spilling across the floor. It landed on Peter's face, soft, warm, forgiving. I stood holding him close, the light wrapping around us like a quiet blessing. Through the open window, I could still hear the police siren fading away, Camille's world disappearing down the road. Behind me was pain and betrayal. In my arms was innocence and hope. And for the first time, the line between them was clear, unshakable. Justice had arrived, and love had survived. Camille's sentencing drew national attention. Cameras flashed as she was escorted into the federal courtroom in handcuffs, her once perfect image gone forever. The same reporters who had once praised her for balancing motherhood and modern life now called her by her true name, Camille Torres, International Fugitive. When the judge read the verdict, 15 years in federal prison for identity theft, fraud, and grand larceny. The room fell silent. Camille didn't cry. She just stared blankly ahead, lips trembling, the weight of her lies finally too heavy to carry. News stations replayed the footage for days. "A model mother turned criminal," one anchor said. "A quiet Ohio neighborhood fooled by a woman hiding in plain sight." The story became a national cautionary tale about deceit, greed, and the dangers of blind trust. To the public, she was just another headline. But to us, she was the storm we had survived. Gavin sat in the back row during sentencing, his hands clasped tightly. I could see the shame in his posture, the exhaustion in his eyes. When the gavel struck, he bowed his head and whispered something, maybe a prayer, maybe an apology, no one else could hear. Afterward, he couldn't look at anyone, not even me. For weeks, he barely spoke, moving through the house like a ghost. But time, as it always does, began to soften the sharpest edges of grief. One morning, he came into the kitchen early, sleeves rolled up, smelling faintly of coffee and determination. "I'm going back to work," he said simply. "And I signed up for evening classes. I want Peter to see the kind of man his father should have been." His voice was quiet but steady. I saw the strength returning, slow, fragile, but real. As for me, I poured my energy into rebuilding what was left of our lives. The old house, once filled with shouting and fear, became warm again. Lucas helped us repaint the walls and fix the porch. The scent of fresh wood and new beginnings filled the air. In the living room, I hung a framed photo of Peter, laughing in the garden sunlight in his eyes. Beside it on the mantel stood Lucas's old police badge, its silver gleam catching the afternoon light. Every time I passed by, I paused for a moment. The photo, the badge, the quiet hum of the house together, they reminded me that justice and family aren't separate things. They are the same heartbeat, steady and enduring. The morning light fell softly over the porch, bathing everything in a calm, golden glow. The storm had long passed, and the air smelled of wet grass and new beginnings. I sat on the old wooden chair, a cup of tea warming my hands, while Peter ran barefoot across the yard, giggling. He was holding Lucas's old police badge, the same one that had once symbolized justice and courage. The silver gleamed in the sunlight as he waved it proudly in the air. Gavin stepped outside quietly, his steps slow but sure. He leaned against the porch railing, looking out at his son. His voice was low when he spoke. "Mom," he said, his eyes following Peter's laughter. "I used to think silence meant peace, that staying quiet kept things from falling apart. But now I know sometimes justice needs a voice." I turned to look at him. His face carried both weariness and wisdom, the kind that only comes from learning the hard way. A faint smile touched my lips. "You're right, son," I said softly. "Kindness isn't meant to be taken advantage of. It's a weapon when used at the right time for the right reason." He nodded, his shoulders easing as if a long weight had finally lifted. Peter came running toward us, then clutching the badge with both hands. "Nana, look! I'm like Uncle Lucas," he said, his eyes bright with innocence. I reached out, lifting him onto my lap, feeling the warmth of his small body and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against mine. For a moment, everything felt still, the quiet hum of the morning, the chirping of birds, the faint rustle of the wind through the trees. Peace had finally returned, but it was not the fragile kind born of silence. It was the peace that comes after truth, after standing your ground. I looked at Peter's smile and then at Gavin, who now stood a little taller, a little freer. Yet as the sunlight shifted, my gaze drifted beyond the garden toward the horizon, distant, hazy, uncertain. Forgiveness. That was a different kind of justice, one that time alone could deliver. I took a deep breath, the tea cooling in my hands, and whispered almost to myself, "Whether I forgive or not, maybe time will answer that for me." And as Peter laughed again, his small voice echoing across the quiet morning, I knew the fight was over, but the lesson would remain. If you've ever been taken advantage of or forced into silence within your own home, don't keep it inside. Share your story. Reclaim the justice that belongs to your own life.